Let's start with the headline that's everywhere. Iran offered a deal to end the war with America. But here's the crucial detail. Most serious reporting is not saying there's a signed deal, or even formal negotiations. Instead, reporting describes indirect signaling, messages conveyed through intermediaries, suggesting Iran could be prepared to open talks about how to stop the war, while U.S. officials insist there are no active negotiations. CNN, according to CNN, people familiar with the indirect messages said the communication was conveyed through a third country to the CIA, but the channel had not produced serious discussions on ending the war. CNN. And that's where this story becomes explosive. Because in modern conflicts, the path to peace often starts exactly like this: quiet feelers, deniable messages, and probing for leverage. Now watch the contradiction play out in real time. CNN reports that Iranian intelligence sent word that Iran could be prepared to talk about ending the war, again, described as indirect messages through a third country. CNN also reports U.S. officials saying there are no negotiations underway and that potential off-ramps are unlikely soon. CNN then comes the public denial from Iran's deputy foreign minister, Majid Takht Ravanchi, saying no message is being sent to the U.S. and that Iran is focused on defending itself. CNN. So how can all of that be true at once? Here are the three most realistic explanations, without slipping into conspiracy. 1. Back channels exist precisely because leaders want plausible deniability. 2. Different power centers inside Iran may be sending different signals, especially when leadership is in flux. 3. Both sides may be using ambiguity as a weapon. We're open to peace, but only on our terms, and we won't look weak. And that third point matters, because perception is ammunition. U.S. messaging, at least in the reporting we have, leans hard toward "the campaign continues." CNN quotes a senior Trump administration official describing the situation as military action that has to run its course, and saying they're not using anyone as an interlocutor. CNN and public remarks reported by PBS paint a picture of shifting goals, shifting timelines, and a debate inside the U.S. about whether there is a clear endgame. PBS reports Trump cycling through different framings, from unconditional surrender language to statements implying the conflict could end soon, while also emphasizing the strikes aren't finished. PBS, this is where Americans at home feel the tension. If the goal is limited, stop certain capabilities, that's one kind of war. If the goal is leadership collapse, total dismantling, or a sweeping redesign of the region, then you're talking about something else entirely. On Iran's side, one of the clearest public terms appears in comments from Iran's president as described by Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera reports President Masoud Pezeshkian outlined conditions: recognition of Iran's legitimate rights, payment of reparations, and firm international guarantees against future aggression. Al Jazeera. But the same Al Jazeera reporting also highlights internal friction. Iran's political leadership may not fully control the military posture, with the IRGC and hardliners holding major influence, creating contradictory signals that complicate diplomacy. Al Jazeera. So if you're asking, is Iran offering a deal? The most accurate answer is, Iran appears to be signaling possible conditions and pathways, but there's no public confirmation of a formal U.S.-Iran deal, and there are public denials of messaging even as reporting describes indirect contacts. That is not a Hollywood script. That is what real-world conflict de-escalation often looks like. Even before the war context described in these reports, the nuclear issue was the central pressure point. The BBC reports that in earlier Geneva talks mediated by Oman, the sides showed openness to new and creative ideas and made significant progress, while key differences remained unclear and unresolved. BBC AP reports that Iran and the US held hours of indirect negotiations and walked away without a deal, while Oman's foreign minister again said there had been significant progress. AP describes the sticking points bluntly: Iran insisting on enrichment and sanctions relief, while Trump wants Iran to halt enrichment and also roll back missile programs and support for armed groups, issues Iran says it won't discuss. AP. So the deal conversation can't be separated from the red lines conversation. Iran says enrichment rights plus sanctions relief US wants, halt enrichment plus broader constraints. Now let's talk about the pressure that forces both sides toward either escalation or compromise: the global economy. PBS reports the Strait of Hormuz context directly, describing how the waterway is vital for oil flow and that the Revolutionary Guard said oil would not pass until the U.S. stopped bombing. PBS Reuters similarly describes markets and logistics being hit, with disruption and energy impacts shaping the war's cost. Reuters reports Gulf states privately resenting being pulled into a conflict they did not choose, while facing strikes and economic shock, plus the fear of what happens if the war ends without a decisive outcome. Reuters. Here's the point. When shipping and oil routes choke, the conflict stops being over there. It hits gas prices, supply chains, insurance rates, and markets, right here at home. This is why end the war talk tends to surge when economic pain spreads. Let's get brutally honest. Wars don't end when everyone suddenly becomes friends. Wars end when leaders can sell an outcome as survival or victory. What the U.S. side appears to emphasize, a White House fact sheet, describes a maximum pressure posture and repeats the stated objective that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, while describing military actions and economic pressure intended to force outcomes. White House publicly, that sets a baseline. Any deal must look like the U.S. forced Iran away from nuclear capability. What Iran's public messaging suggests, it needs Al Jazeera reports Pezeshkian's conditions: recognition of rights, reparations, and guarantees. Al Jazeera. That's not just policy, it's narrative armor. It's the kind of language used to show their public, we didn't fold, we extracted terms. So the deal, if it exists in any form, likely isn't a single document right now. It's a negotiation over who gets to claim they didn't blink. As of today, based on what's being reported, not guesswork, not fantasies, there are 3 realistic endgame paths: ending, backchannel, temporary halt, talks, restart. This is the scenario hinted by the very existence of indirect messages reported by CNN, signals probing for a pathway to stop the war, even as officials deny formal negotiations. CNN. The first deal wouldn't be a peace treaty. It would be something like a pause, verification steps, a face-saving statement for both sides, and a return to mediated talks, likely through Oman, which has been described as mediating. AP ending. Escalation. Until one side can't sustain the costs. Reuters describes the idea, through Trump's comments, that the war could end only once Iran no longer has functioning military capacity or leadership. Reuters. That's a very different kind of ending. Less diplomacy, more attrition, more chaos, and far more regional spillover risk. Exactly what Reuters reports Gulf states fear and resent. Reuters. Ending. A hybrid outcome. Ceasefire language. Ongoing shadow. War. This is the most common modern ending. Publicly, leaders declare mission accomplished or objectives achieved, and major combat slows, but covert pressure and sporadic strikes continue. This is why PBS's reporting on uncertainty and lack of a clear endgame resonates, because hybrid endings are politically easier than clean conclusions. PBS. If you want to track whether a real deal is forming, don't chase viral clips. Watch for these verifiable signals. First, credible confirmation of sustained intermediary contact beyond one-off messages. CNN's reporting stresses the channel hasn't produced serious end-of-war talks yet. CNN. Second, movement on the nuclear file, especially any language around enrichment limits and sanctions relief, which AP and BBC both describe as central sticking points. AP-BBC. Third, whether the Strait of Hormuz pressure eases, because PBS reports oil flow threats tied directly to whether bombing stops. PBS. Those 3 signals tell you more than any anonymous source says peace is coming, post ever will. So, did Iran offer a deal to end the war with America? What we can say, based on the reporting, is this. There are signs of indirect outreach described by CNN, paired with U.S. insistence that no negotiations are underway, and public Iranian denial of messaging, while public Iranian leadership statements outline conditions for ending the war. CNN. Al Jazeera. In other words, the first step toward a deal may be happening, but it's not a deal yet. And if there is a breakthrough, it won't start with a handshake in front of cameras. It'll start with quiet messages that everyone denies, until suddenly they don't. Disclaimer: this video is for educational and commentary purposes only. I'm using publicly available reporting, and in a fast-moving conflict, details can change quickly. Nothing here should be taken as official statements or instructions.